Hello there, I'm here today to read some books about people unraveling and losing their minds, and I'm very excited about this, and I would like to be honest with you and tell you that I've already read all of these books, and I forgot to film this intro part. So we're going to go really quickly through the books, and then we'll cut to me talking about them more in depth. So, here is our stack. On the top, we have The Mustache. This is about a man, and he shaves off his mustache, and no one in his life notices, and he goes crazy, wondering if a prank is being pulled on him or if he ever had a mustache in the first place. Then we have Come Closer by Sara Gran. Does this fit the theme? Not really. It's about a woman who's possessed by a demon, but in the first half of it, she doesn't really realize she's possessed, and she's just like experiencing all this erratic behavior and like things happening that she's obviously done that she doesn't remember, and it's very intense. Then we have Rabbits for Food. This is about a woman with really severe depression, and it all kind of culminates at this moment at this New Year's Eve party with her friends that ends in her being institutionalized. And then we have Piglet, which is about a woman, and she is about to get married when her husband confesses this secret to her, and then she just slowly spirals, and she has this compulsion to eat like tons and tons of food, this insatiable hunger, and she also has to make her own wedding cake, and it's not going well. Full transparency, I've already read all of these, and they were fun and I had a good time, so I'm gonna let me from the past tell you about them. Hello there, I'm here to talk to you about The Mustache, a book about a man who shaves off his 10-year-old mustache, no one in his life notices, and he loses his mind because of it. Does that not sound so compelling? And it was. I loved this book. This was exactly what I wanted it to be. I'm going to get into everything that happened in it and then tell you my thoughts. So it starts with our unnamed narrator, and he's in the bath preparing to go to a dinner party with his friends. And he says to his wife, "Should I shave off my mustache?" jokingly. And she's like, "Maybe it would look good." Also kind of jokingly. And then she goes downstairs to pick up some groceries, which immediately I was so jealous of. Like, she's like, "I'm just going to pop downstairs and get some groceries." Can you imagine not living in the fucking suburbs? Anyway, while she's gone, he's like, "I'm just gonna shave it off." Like, it would be funny to see her reaction to me without a mustache. This woman has never seen him without the mustache. So he does it, and he immediately regrets it a little bit. He thinks that he looks weird, and then he's like all anxious and like shy about his wife coming home. And he doesn't face her immediately. She doesn't see it immediately. He's like building up this moment in his head. And then when he finally turns to face her, she doesn't react at all. And he's like, "This is so weird." Like, there wasn't even a moment where she had to like pull herself together. She just truly did not react to his lack of mustache. But he's like, "You know what? Agnes is a jokester. This is something that she would do. Me messing with her and her turning it right back around onto me and messing with me." He thinks about how she would, like, she calls up her friends and she says, "Hey, what's going on with your door?" And they're like, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, "I swear to God, like, I'm at the phone booth across the street. I just walked past your house. Your door has been replaced by a brick wall." And she does stuff like this so convincingly. Like, she's such a good liar, and she's so good at being manipulative for a joke. And she's also someone who can be kind of self-centered and then not admit what she's done. Like, never come clean about it. He talks about this story where they go on vacation with their friends, these friends that they're going to go for dinner with. And while they're on vacation at this house, they say, like, you can't turn your radiator up in your room past, like, 50% or the fuse is gonna blow. And she chills easily and wants to be warm, so she keeps cranking it up all the way, and the fuses keep blowing over and over and over again. She finally agrees to stop doing it, and then one night she goes to bed early, and everyone, when they go to bed, they find their rooms freezing cold because she's clearly gone through and turned off everyone else's radiators so that she can turn hers up all the way without the fuse blowing. And she won't admit to this. They come and confront her, and she's like, "I didn't do that." And she doesn't even offer an alternative explanation. She just truly never admits to it. Even later, when everyone's not mad anymore and they're joking about it, she never says, "Yeah, I did it." So it's not out of the realm of possibility that she is just messing with him. But then they get to the friend's house, and when he gets upstairs, they say nothing. They also don't notice the mustache is gone. Now, she goes up first while he's looking for parking, so he's like, she's trained them. She's coached them not to react to the lack of mustache. But he thinks it's crazy that they're as good at lying as she is. He's kind of going back and forth between thinking like, "Oh, this is such a good joke. I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to wait for her to finally say something about it." And then feeling like maybe he's crazy, but then also feeling like angry at her. Like, obviously it's gone too far now. Just say something about the mustache. So he's not giving in, and he's not giving in until finally he has to. And he says, "Okay, very funny. What do you actually think of the mustache?" And she's like, "What are you talking about?" They end up getting into this huge fight about it because she won't break character, even though he's really quite upset and angry. She ends up crying, and then they both come to the conclusion, like, wow, the other one really does believe this, and they both think that they're in the right. They try to let it go, but they just can't. He says, where are the photos from our ski trip? And she just like throws a photo at him, and he can see in the photo that he has a mustache. They end up calling the friends that they saw that night and saying, hey, has this guy ever had a mustache? And they are like, oh my God, it's 2 a.m. Leave us the fuck alone. No, he's never had a mustache. What are you talking about? And he's like, did Agnes tell you to say that? And they're like, no, she didn't. And she says, hey, if I told you to say this, you can come clean now. I want you to stop lying if that's what I told you to do. Has he ever had a mustache? And they say, go the fuck away. No, he hasn't. She says, you can call anyone. Call anyone in your phone book and they will side with me. You have never had a mustache. And he's like, I'm not going to do that. They're going to think I'm crazy. She has called his bluff. But then the next day, he goes to work with his coworkers Samira and Jerome, who he's quite close with, and they also say nothing about this lack of mustache. And he's like, oh my God, she literally called everyone in the phone book and told them to tell me that I have never had a mustache. He asks them if Agnes has called them. They say, no, like obviously not. What are you talking about? But he doesn't really let on to the mustache dilemma because he doesn't want people to think that he's crazy, and he's starting to feel like he is crazy. He's really just spiraling. It's so interior. He's in his head thinking, how has this happened? What is going on? What's the truth? It's very mysterious. It's very intense. He ends up going out and sitting on a park bench, and he sees a blind man crossing the street, and he's like, perfect. I know exactly how to tell whether or not I've had a mustache in the past. He feels like he cannot ask anyone else in his life or they're going to institutionalize him. Like he doesn't want to let on to anyone that this is happening to him because he feels crazy. So he puts on his sunglasses and he pretends to be blind, and he walks up to this woman and he says, hey, what is this ID? Just wondering if it belongs to my friend. I think I accidentally put it in my pocket. And he hands her his ID. And she says, oh, the man in the ID is you. And he's like, are you sure? And then he's like, fuck, I didn't get the mustache answer. So he says, does he have a mustache? And she says, yeah, and so do you. Now he's shaved his mustache. So what the fuck is this woman talking about? There is something like maybe she's just referring to like the stubble that's growing back, but he has no idea. He goes home that night and he's trying to just let it go with Agnes to maintain their beautiful relationship. They do really love each other as a couple, but he can't. So he goes and he digs through the garbage, and the garbage has been taken out. So he goes out to the street and he digs through the entire apartment worth of garbage, and he finds the garbage from the bathroom on the day that he shaved his mustache, and there's hairs in there, and he takes them upstairs and he's like, look at this. I really did shave my mustache. And she's like, okay. So he comes to the conclusion that she is the one that's gone crazy. He's in the right and she has lost it. And he thinks, I have to support her. I have to drop this. And also, I need to get her some psychiatric help. They go out for dinner together, and the waiter asks for his ID because he's getting wine. He gives over the ID, and she takes it from him after the waiter leaves, and she says, oh, very clever. And she rubs at the mustache on the ID, and her finger comes off black, like he's drawn it on. And so she ends up taking a razor blade out of her purse and scraping the mustache off to make the ID more accurate. And she kind of like botches it. And later on, he tests another dark part of the photo to see if the ink just comes off, and he rubs at it, and nothing comes away on his finger. So he assigns a lot of premeditation to her, thinking that she had darkened her finger with a pen before putting on that display. When they get home from dinner, he still cannot drop this, and so he goes looking for more photos of himself, and he can't find any. Those photos from the ski trip that he was looking at before, they're gone. She ends up actually pulling out some photos for him where he is mustached in all of the photos, but she says, there was no ski trip. We never went here. And he's looking around the apartment at all of the trinkets from their ski trip. When they're looking at these photos together, he says, do I have a mustache in these? He can see the mustache, clear as day. And she says, no. And he says, promise me I don't have a mustache. She says, you don't have a mustache. And then he decides he's the one that's crazy. And he just starts spiraling. He's asking her if everything that has happened in the last like 5 minutes is true. He says, are you my wife, Agnes? She says, yes. Like, it's just going back and forth and back and forth. He has no idea what is reality and what isn't anymore. She says, should I cancel lunch with your parents today? It seems like you're not feeling up for it, because he is in a state. And he says, yes. So she calls his mom and they talk, whatever. And then he says, can you cancel with our friends too? The friends that they saw the first night? She says, we don't have any friends by those names. He's asking a lot more questions, trying to figure out like the boundaries of his reality. And then she ends up letting the information slip that his dad is dead. He says, you just said you were going to call my parents. She says, no, I said I was going to call your mom. He had called his coworker Jerome, whose wife had to see a psychiatrist, to get connected with one for Agnes before he decided that he was actually the crazy one. So Jerome calls back and him and Agnes plan for this guy to see a psychiatrist. He says, I'm going to go to sleep. He takes some sleeping pills and he sits there and he's just thinking. And he thinks the only explanation for this is that Agnes and Jerome are working together to make me think that I'm crazy because they're having an affair and they want me to get sent to the loony bin or they want me to kill myself. And this very quickly becomes reality for him. It kind of pieces everything together, but also not at all because there's so much evidence both ways. He thinks if she had coached the friends, that makes sense. And then she had told Jerome to do it. And then Jerome had told their other coworker. So he just books it out of the house. He runs to escape them and he's questioning every single move that he makes, wondering if they're like, oh fuck, like there's been a catch in the plan, or if they're thinking this is exactly what we expected and everything he's doing is playing into their plan. He feels so manipulated and he has no idea. Like he's looking at his own behaviors and his own thoughts in response to their meticulous planning, or what he assumes is their meticulous planning. In many ways, even though he's decided that they're trying to drive him crazy, he hasn't avoided being driven crazy. He runs to his parents' place and he can't find it. He knows he's on the right street, but he doesn't know which house is his. And he knows the code, but he's like, oh my God, it's going to slip from my mind. So he's like walking up and down this street, trying the code on all the doors, and he cannot find where his parents live. He realizes the only thing I can do is leave the country. I have to get as far away as possible or they will find me and they will make it seem like I have lost my mind. And there's no way for me to explain what's happening to me without it sounding like I have lost my mind. So he calls Agnes and he says, I'm sorry I ran away. I need to see the psychiatrist. Can you please come pick me up? I'm outside my parents' house. And then he watches her car drive by on a one-way street where he knows she'll have to pass. And when he sees her, he runs back to their apartment, picks up his passport, his credit cards, and gets the fuck out of Paris. And he gets on a plane as far away as he can get in that moment to Hong Kong. And he's there mostly because he realizes he loves Agnes, but he realizes that even if he goes back to her and they decide to never talk about it again or that everything's fine, he will be constantly waiting the rest of his life for everything to implode again. He'll be waiting for him to say something like reference their shared past and for that long, heavy pause to come from her. When he gets to Hong Kong, he just kind of takes a ferry back and forth over and over and over again. He kind of becomes friendly with the attendant and he sits on this ferry thinking. And I think that this is kind of his display of his own agency. He has taken control over something by choosing to go on this ferry over and over and over again with no destination in mind. He's really just like going over what has happened, how he feels about himself, what he really thinks is going on. He goes back and forth so much about whether or not he's lost his mind. And he has a really interesting, like, new, refreshed perspective on lunacy. And he's also really thinking about how he could possibly ever communicate this without pushing himself further into the realm of insanity. He wanders around Hong Kong for a long time, just really trying to forget his life. And this is part of the book where it gets a little bit slow and a little bit repetitive. I didn't care all that much at this point, but there is an explosive ending that makes it worth it. He goes back to his hotel one day, and the concierge says, your lady's waiting for you upstairs. And he's like, oh fuck. Goes upstairs. Who's there but Agnes? And she just picks up where they left off before all of this happened, like asking him about the most mundane things as if she's always been there, and he goes along with it. He says, I'm gonna go take a bath. He gets in the bath, which is where this book begins, and he shaves. And he shaves off his mustache, and then he starts to slice up his face. And the book ends with him cutting his own throat in the bathtub. The descriptions of what he was doing and how much pain he was in these last, 2 pages were so evocative and horrific. I was, curled up. Every muscle in my body was tense reading this. I loved this book. I thought it was a 5-star read, even though it definitely wasn't perfect. It was just exactly what I wanted in the moment that I was reading it. Man goes crazy because no one notices he shaved off his mustache. That's perfect. It was done really well. I love that there was no clear... I knew reading the book that it wasn't going to give me answers, and I kind of loved that it didn't. I really liked that there is so much evidence both ways, that either of them could be the crazy one. There are so many different ways that this could be happening, and the book never really points you directly in one direction. For any possibility that could be happening, there's just as much evidence why that can't be what's happening. It's great. I loved it. The translation was pretty good. I was mostly impressed with it. At some points, there are sentences that are a little bit weird with the dialogue. The translation from French was pretty good. I was impressed with it most of the time. I think that there were some sentences that were a little bit clunky and felt translated, but on the whole, it was quite good. I think it could use a better edit. There were a few spelling, grammar mistakes, a lot of like missed periods at the end of sentences, which is fascinating how differently your brain reads that. Even if the next sentence is capitalized, the period really is like a hard stop. This book was super uncanny. It was full of paranoia and tension, and it was just a fun read. It's such a fucking fun concept. I really, really enjoyed it. And despite the chapters being quite long, I really felt myself just flying through this little book. Other than like 20 pages at the end where he's in Hong Kong, and like I said, it gets a little bit repetitive, this is very fast-paced and very interesting. And yeah, I just love the way it doesn't point you in one specific direction. And though I feel like I didn't really get into it in my synopsis, I liked the way it explored the dynamic between the man and his wife. They love each other, but in such an interesting way. Like, I think this quote kind of sums it up. Whatever came to pass, no matter how improbable it seemed, even if she held a gun to his head, at the very moment she was about to pull the trigger, when his brains would splatter all over his broken skull, he'd think, she loves me. That dynamic, while at the same time you think that your wife is having an affair and trying to convince you that you have gone insane, is so interesting. It was just like a very unique voice and a very unique perspective. And I thought that it was pretty, not like revolutionary, but pretty nice to read a book from the 80s where this man is like, my wife has gone insane and I will support her through this. We'll get through this together. And I still love her nonetheless, even though her perceived insanity was affecting him greatly and like causing him to question everything. He was still like, I love this woman. As far as books about people unraveling go, this is exactly what I'm looking for. Just like questioning your grip on reality endlessly. It was amazing. The next book I'm reading is Rabbits for Food, which I am approximately halfway through. I'm not liking this quite as much as the other one. Rabbits for Food is about a woman who is depressed. Now, the summary says that this kind of all kicks off because of this New Year's Eve party that she goes to with her friends where she fully unravels. I'm very disappointed to learn that that happens at least halfway through the book. I have not got to it yet. So far, this has all been build up to this New Year's party, and she has nothing crazy has happened, and I wish the summary didn't spoil that for me. I think there would have been a lot more tension, and it would have been a lot more interesting if I didn't know whether or not she was gonna lose it at this party. So Bunny is extremely depressed, and she's living at home with her husband, Albie. She hasn't left the house in 6 weeks. She doesn't shower, she doesn't brush her teeth. It's a severe depression, and Albie is supporting her through this the best he can. She is a downer and a pessimist, and she tells it like it is. And the book does explicitly say that she's not a likable woman, and I kind of enjoy how much I hate her and how rude I think she is, but I do think it sometimes positions it as like, she's just being honest. This is the honest truth, and she should be able to say the honest truth even if it hurts someone's feelings, when I actually think she's mostly just a cruel person. Like, we learn about her relationship with her sisters, which is quite negative. There's this story where her sister has brought her a mug home from, like, as a souvenir from vacation, and it is absolutely an impersonal gift, and it gives us this context of, like, she just picked it up at the airport because she realized that she hadn't got something for Bunny because they don't like each other very much. So we know that there's nothing kind or caring about this gift giving. But Bunny opens the gift and she says, like, you bought it at the St. Thomas airport, but it was made in China. Just to be rude. A better example is when their upstairs neighbor's baby is walking for the first time, and he's like walking down the hall, and her husband comes in and he's like, oh my God, the baby is walking. And she's like, so babies walk. I'd be impressed if it was flying. Or another example, a story from her childhood where her mother has put up this like faux brick wall, and it's been taken a lot of work, and she finally reveals it to her daughters, and they go, oh my God, it's amazing. And Bunny goes, are you kidding? It looks horrible. No one would ever believe that's real brick. So the book is going back and forth between a lot of exposition into Bunny's life and the build up to this New Year's party. The exposition, we learn about her relationship with her family, which is bad. We learn about her dynamic with her husband, where he's very supportive, and we learn about her past with mental health treatment, which is extensive. And there's also little glimpses of this beautiful relationship she had with her best friend Stella, who was like a sister if she was able to pick her sisters, and Stella is dead. So in the chapters that are present day, she's talking with her husband, and he's trying to convince her not to go to this party. He knows this isn't going to end well. She doesn't like New Year's anyway. She hates it every year, and she has been experiencing this severe depression, and he has some foresight into what is going to happen here. But she's convinced that this is something that she wants to do. And it's not 100% clear why. It's maybe just something that she's grasped onto as a way to get out of the house. During this day, Albie goes out for lunch with his friend Muriel. They have sex. They're kind of affair partners, but not really. It says it's like just very purely sex between the two of them. Nothing more. There's not really feelings there. They are close friends, but they're not like in love with each other. And Albie is fully and totally committed to Bunny. While he's gone out with Muriel, she shreds all of her paperwork. Everything that she has accumulated in her entire life, the last thing she shreds being a photo of her and Stella at their college graduation. Like, she gets rid of her passport, her birth certificate, all of it. Despite Albie's worrying and his constant questioning of whether or not this is really something that she wants to do, they end up going to this party, which is at first a dinner, and then they're moving on to a party. And I'm at the part where they're at this dinner. That's halfway through the book. It has been a lot of fucking buildup. But it doesn't feel very high stakes. I mean, first of all, the book has told me that she unravels at this party and she ends up institutionalized. But also, she doesn't really like these people or care about their opinions. And she is consistently a rude, cruel human being, and she has been to these people in the past. So it doesn't really make me feel like, I don't know, I care all that much, or like I'm gonna be so like shocked and humiliated for her experience, like a secondhand embarrassment or anything like that. I just think she doesn't give a fuck about really anybody but herself. So like I said, like I don't care about this book nearly as much as The Mustache, and I'm not all that interested in her story. There's enough intrigue to keep me going, and it reads super quickly. Like, it looks big, it's really not. I'm reading this so incredibly fast. The language is very simple, everything's very easy to grasp, and it can be a little bit repetitive on like the sentence level, so you just fly through it. So I think I'm gonna go finish this, and then I'll talk to you more about it. Hello, so I finished Rabbits for Food, and to be honest with you, I also finished Piglet, and I'm like over halfway through Come Closer. So it's been a while since I've made an update. I'm going to tell you what happened in the rest of this book. Where I left off, it had been building up to this New Year's Eve dinner party that she was going to go to, and she goes to it. And kind of like everyone expects, it doesn't go well. She gets there and it's incredibly overwhelming. The murmuring noise of the crowd, the conversation that her friends are having that she thinks is meaningless and stupid. They're like talking about the good kinds of balsamic vinegar, and she's angry about this. She's just like, why does it matter? Why does it fucking matter what the nice balsamic vinegars are? And she expresses this, and they're like, well, what do you want to talk about then, Bunny? And she says olive oil, just kind of like playing it off as a joke. She's thinking a lot of angry thoughts. She's very mad about everything going on around her, but she's keeping it mostly to herself. Then the food comes, and she cannot properly use chopsticks, but all of a sudden her appetite, which has been completely gone during this long depression, is back, and it's voracious, and she just wants to eat so badly, and she cannot get this piece of ravioli up into her mouth with the chopstick. It all comes to a head, and she takes the fork and she stabs herself in the leg with it. And that's the end of part 1, her stabbing herself in the thigh. Part 2, she's being admitted into a psych ward, and this is where the book started, with her in this psych ward waiting for dog therapy, and now the rest of the book is her experience in the psych ward. Now, while she's in here, she is not in a way that I think we're supposed to appreciate, but still doing it nonetheless, calling everyone around her crazies, lunatics, psychos. She's in the loony bin, everyone's psychotic, and she kind of justifies this, or the author maybe justifies this, by portraying a deeply inaccurate picture of what the people in a psych ward look like. Like, everyone is either catatonic or in active psychosis. Every single person. It's so ridiculously inaccurate. Like, everyone is this stereotypical caricature. There's a man who walks around with his underwear over top of his jeans. I don't know. It's hard to explain, but it was fucking stupid. It was so fucking stupid. While she's in here, she's kind of refusing treatment, and they are also being very stubborn, the doctors here. She doesn't want to take the 2 medications that they've prescribed her because, fairly enough, they have some really serious side effects. And the doctors are not prescribing her any other kinds of medication. Like, they're acting as if these 2 meds are the only ones that she could ever be prescribed that would ever work for her. Like, there's not dozens of psychiatric medications out there. But she can't leave this place without a treatment plan. Now that she's been admitted, she is legally under the care of this hospital, and she can't choose to leave unless the doctors decide that she's ready to. So in the absence of an agreement on medication, they're kind of pushing electroconvulsive therapy. therapy, which is something that a lot of the people who she starts to make friends with are doing. She gets adopted into the popular gang because her husband Albie is bringing her snacks all the time, and lots of the people here have been here for a long time. They don't get many visitors and they don't get many snacks, and so she's able to ask Albie to bring stuff for other people. She starts becoming a more empathetic person in here, but nothing really marks this shift. She kind of goes to the psych ward and all of a sudden her entire personality is different. I don't really know why. She ends up agreeing to the electroconvulsive therapy. Then in the last 30 to 40 pages, it seems like she's falling in love with one of her friends, Josh, kind of out of the blue. There's not really been a dynamic established between the two of them, and it seems like he likes her too. We don't really get much of it. I think it's a really weird thing to have been included. All of a sudden they're just kind of touching each other under the table. They never really have any conversations though. It's strange. I think as the reader we're definitely supposed to see that this is an okay thing because Albie is cheating on her with Muriel. He's doing this while she's in the hospital, and the day before her first ECT therapy, she tells Albie, I know about Muriel. And she says, you don't need to apologize. It's okay. I get it. I know that you are committed to me. And this is just a little fling that you're having to keep yourself committed to me. The book ends in the style of the Bell Jar, where she goes in for this electroconvulsive therapy and then she comes out of it and she's kind of in a daze. There's not any resolution or any sense of a satisfying ending or an explosive ending. It's kind of boring. Honestly, I feel for me, the book could have ended at the end of part 1, and that maybe would have been more interesting. I think this book was just okay. Spliced up in here are creative writing prompts that she is doing as part of the therapy in the psych ward, and that's been happening the whole time through part 1 and part 2. And in one of them, she says, people who are hard to have feelings too. And that irritated me so much because never once in this book has this woman cared about anyone else's feelings but her own, and now she's being just because I'm a shitty person doesn't mean that you shouldn't care about how I feel. Oh my god, it was so annoying. The other thing with that is that her name is Bunny and the author's name is Binnie, and so it was hard to tell whether or not this was a self-insert. And if it was, damn, this girl has some fucking reflection to do. I thought that this book was both overwritten and underwritten. I felt like every single chapter almost should have ended one sentence earlier. She was just giving us a little bit too much. A lot, you flip through this book, a lot of these very short chapters, they just have one too many sentences. It's hard to describe, but I think if you read it, you will see it. And on that short chapter thing, I find that almost every author who writes books with very short chapters and decides to do a clever little name for each and every chapter is not clever enough to pull that off. I typically skip chapter names because I don't care about them. I don't really think it ever adds anything to my experience. Even short story collections, I'll skip the name of the short story. And maybe I'll go back and read it after I've read the story, but I don't know. I don't want to read it. And every time in this book I read the chapter name, I hated it. I thought it was stupid, it was trying to be clever, and it wasn't. Another thing here that I think when it fails, it really fails, is a dry sense of humor. I love a dry sense of humor, and I love that in literature, but if you can't do it well, wow, is it hard to read. And that was this book. The main problem with this book overall is the blurb. I think the blurb set it up to fail. It spoils it, telling you that she unravels at this New Year's Eve party, and that happens halfway through the book. I know the whole thing, we're set up to know that she's almost 100% likely going to do something unhinged at this New Year's Eve party. It would have been so much more fun of a read if there was a little bit of questioning of maybe she is fine. Maybe this will all be okay. I hated that I didn't get that. The blurb also says that it's funny, it's not funny, and it says that she unravels. And I think I've been using that language too. It's not that. This is really just a story of mental illness, of depression. And I want to say this, and I want to say it with sensitivity, because I feel like it's going to sound maybe almost invalidating or something, and that's not where I'm coming from. I'm saying this in the most validating way. I believe that depression and severe depression is inherently and devastatingly and bleakly boring. Is that not part of what's so horrific about it? Is that it's so mind-numbingly boring. And I think the blurb fails here with that, because what I wanted and what it told me I was getting is someone unraveling, someone losing their grip on reality, when really she's just experiencing a very severe depression. And depression itself is, like I said, devastatingly boring. And so it was boring. I think you can write it in an interesting way, not with 400 pages though. That's too many pages to make depression interesting. Another thing that just didn't mesh well for me with this book is that this is written in a past that is not that far off, where people were really invalidating with depression, saying things like, everybody has bad days, suck it up, keep your head up, we love you, that kind of thing. And while I have lived through that era, I think it's just kind of a lazy way of talking about other people's perceptions of depression. I think that what's happening now with like, just go to therapy, like that's a lot more insidious and a lot more interesting. That's just a personal nitpick though. I didn't like reading about depression in 2008. The strongest thing in this book, I think, was my hatred for the main character. I really loved like watching her fuck up every relationship in her life because she is such a cruel person. I liked seeing how she got to the places she got to when she was rude to people, like when she's rude to her sister about the mug. Yeah, it was an impersonal gift, for sure. She just has no sense of caring about other people's feelings or like social etiquette, I guess, but more like empathy. And I did think that this gave me some things to think about, particularly with Bunny's attitude. I realized when she was getting dressed for this New Year's Eve party that I had been considering her personality and her way of being as so divorced from femininity that it was really like strange to me to see that she was getting dressed in this like frilly vintage dress. She was like putting on makeup. I thought that was like shocking for some reason, and I really had to like think about the misogyny that is rooted in. Just this like deeply rooted unconscious idea that femininity is equivalent to like purity or like goodness. Like, not only is that misogyny, that's white supremacy. So in that sense, this gave me like a lot to think about just with that one little thing. And I'm still thinking about it and still reflecting on it. But I don't have much positive to say other than that. I found this to be very fast. I thought I could read it so quickly. I would look up at the page number I was at and be shocked. Like I was 20, 30, 40 pages ahead of where I thought I was. And even though this deals with pretty heavy topics, it tries to do so with a dry sense of humor and absolutely fails. But that makes it quick. You can get through this book much quicker than you think you can. And if you have been institutionalized and you're thinking, this is going to be a bit triggering for me, I don't really want to hear about someone who's in a psych ward, don't worry, because this is the most ridiculous stereotypical portrayal of a psych ward ever. It will have nothing in common with your experience. So there's that. That's a positive, right? So with rabbits for food out of the way, the next book I read was Piglet by Lottie Hazell, whose name I over and over again keep saying is hazell, and perhaps I've said that in this video. If I have, that is pretty embarrassing. Either way, whichever version you go with, it's a very British name, and this is a British book following a woman whose childhood nickname is Piglet. That's the only name she ever has in this book. She's like an editor at a cookbook publishing house, and her husband are due to be married, and then 2 weeks before their wedding, he confesses the ultimate betrayal, and they decide to go ahead with the wedding as she spirals. Part 1 of this book is set up as countdown days until the wedding. So it starts with 98 days until the wedding, with this housewarming party as Piglet and her fiance Kit have moved into their new house, and we're kind of getting a dynamic establishment here. We learn that Kit comes from a pretty wealthy family, where Piglet comes from a working class family who she's really embarrassed about. She also has this best friend, Margot, who comes to the party. Margot is pregnant with her and her wife, Sasha's child. And then Kit's friends, Seb and Sophie, are also at this party. And Piglet doesn't really like them. Not really in any way that I can understand reading this chapter. I think if I'm interpreting this in good faith, I think that this was set out to show us that Piglet is kind of this pompous douchebag. So Piglet is a really good cook, and she cooks this beautiful dinner for her guests. And then Sophie says, "This is so delicious. You should go on Bake Off." And Margot and Piglet exchange this look because Sophie doesn't understand that that's not a compliment. Get a grip. Oh my god, so annoying. So already Piglet is a really annoying character. And another thing that's annoying about Piglet at this dinner party, her very best friend in the whole world, like sister bond, is Margot, a vegetarian. And what does she serve but roast chicken, bread, and salad? That's rude as fuck. You cannot invite a vegetarian to your house and then serve an entire chicken and nothing else for them. Oh my god. This is not treated as something that's rude. There's really like one sentence about this. It's crazy. So like I said, Kit's family is pretty wealthy and they're quite like posh, and Piglet's family's not. She's really embarrassed about it. Piglet, however, fits in really well in Kit's world and with his family, which kind of subverts the expectations you would have, because Kit is like the only son or the only child of these wealthy people. You kind of think there would be more tension between his fiance and his mother, but there's not. She's very comfortable in this upper class world. What she's not comfortable with is her best friend Margot's pregnancy. She feels like this pregnancy is just like distance between the two of them. She feels very jealous of Margot's wife. She feels jealous of the baby. She kind of wants Margot to be all hers, and she feels like Margot's moving ahead in life a lot more quickly than she is. Pretty quickly, it's 2 weeks to go before the wedding. Her family come and visit and they stay at her house, and she's just this snotty asshole. She thinks that she has a more sophisticated palate than everybody else, and she treats her family like shit. They're not very nice to her either. They have given her this nickname Piglet that is pretty cruel, but I think in a lot of ways they are well-meaning, where she is not. Right before her family shows up, Kit drops the bombshell, not the big, huge betrayal that we talked about that's coming, but he drops this information that he has unilaterally made the decision to book a ski trip for them the weekend after their wedding with his friends Seb and Sophie. And she's pretty pissed off at him for this. She doesn't want to. It's their first weekend as a married couple, and now his friends that she doesn't really like because she's a dick are coming. That was not a good move on Kit's part. So they're fighting with each other up until the moment that her parents knock on the door. Her parents get there, they have this meal, and while they're there, her parents kind of tactlessly retell this story of how Piglet got her nickname, which is when her younger sister Franny had like a 12th birthday, and they bought this beautiful cake for her, and when they went to take it out of the fridge on her birthday, it was like one slice left, and Piglet was the culprit. Now, this is a choice that I personally really disliked, and I think it would have been interesting if it wasn't made. Piglet says she remembers it differently. She doesn't say this, actually. She keeps it to herself. But she thinks that she remembers this story differently. That she had realized that her younger sister Franny had an eating disorder. She hadn't told anyone, but had kind of like been quietly supporting her through this. And when Franny sees this cake, she comes to Piglet sobbing, saying, "I can't have people see me eating the cake." So Piglet like gets rid of the cake. I think the choice to make her a martyr in this situation is kind of lazy, and it's not nearly as interesting as it would be if she had just done something really selfish, or done something out of a compulsion to eat this cake. It's like the book is spoon-feeding you this idea that she doesn't deserve this nickname of Piglet, this cruel name that has stuck with her entire life, and that her parents are the ones in the wrong, even if they don't have all the information. I don't know. I truly think that the whole book would have been more interesting if that had been something that she had done out of selfishness or out of mental illness or whatever it was, instead of something that she had done to like save her little sister. It was cowardly in my opinion and kind of lame. But anyways, that night her family leaves and her husband Kit breaks down and tells her about this betrayal. There's nothing explicit, but there is the assumption that it was an affair. Now as the reader, you never get any information about this affair or even anything that explicitly states that it was an affair that was this betrayal. That I've seen people complain about a lot, how they were waiting the whole book to learn what it was that Kit had done. I just pretty quickly came to the conclusion that it was an affair. Maybe that's not true, but that's what I decided. And I think that it was a more interesting story because we don't get this information, and because it doesn't center what Kit did, even though most of the story is reactions to what he did and like bouncing off of it. It's not an affair story. It's like what happened because of the affair or because of the betrayal or whatever it was. And I think that if we had gotten all the details about the affair, the book would have been worse for it. For days afterwards, like it's now like 10, 12 days until the wedding, he is groveling and she's completely closed off. She's ignoring him. She won't speak to him. They're still living in the same house. He asks her over and over again if she's okay. She just says, yeah, I'm fine. Or she says nothing. Then one day she goes out for lunch and she orders every single thing on the menu. And she sits at this table with plates and plates and plates around her, and she stuffs herself until she's full. And she doesn't care about how the waiters are looking at her or how the other people in the restaurant perceive her. She just eats because she has this insatiable hunger. Then we get into an absolutely insane dress fitting with her mom, Margot, and Franny. First of all, the dress doesn't quite fit, but it seems to be fine. There's just like a couple buttons that won't do up. And the woman at this very fancy, like expensive dress store says, we can get it tailor it a little bit before the wedding. Like, we still have time to do that. She goes out and she shows her family and her best friend this dress, and her mom says, oh, the buttons aren't quite done up, and it has this like very delicate lace and beading on it, and her mom's like, I can fix it, and everyone's like, no, stop, just leave it. And she's like, no, I'll fix it. And she just keeps being pushier and pushier and pushier, trying to get her hands on the dress to do up these buttons. And like the bridal shop owner, who's this very posh, prissy woman, is like, get away, the beading, oh my god. And in this kerfuffle, Piglet ends up falling down, but it's fine, the dress is fine. But when she gets back up, she looks at Margot and she's like, Margot looks a little bit weird. Margot is literally in labor. And then the bridal shop owner, she's like, oh my god, did your water break on my beautiful white couch? She's going and like touching the couch to see if it's wet, and then Margot's screaming, don't touch me. It's like such a huge explosive scene. Margot's contractions aren't close enough together to warrant going to the hospital, so they end up just taking her back to her apartment. Her baby's like a little bit early, but it's fine. But her wife is in a workshop and isn't picking up her phone because they thought they had more time before the baby was coming. So Piglet is kind of sitting with her and going through the motions of like trying to ease the contraction pain a little bit. And Margot says, distract me. And Piglet's like, okay, now I'll finally tell someone, after days of just like suffering on my own, this is the moment where I'm going to tell you that my husband is having an affair. And Margot's like, why would you tell me that right now? I'm literally about to have a baby. And they start like fighting. And then Sasha appears in the doorway and Piglet goes to leave. And Margot says, no, please stay. I want you to be here. But Piglet says, your wife's here. I'm going. And she leaves. Margot has the baby and everything's okay, but Piglet won't answer her at all. She's completely shutting Margot out right now. And she's also fighting with Kit a lot. They get into a really big fight. Kit has now changed from groveling to being like, we need to get through this together. We need to move past this. And she goes for lunch at her in-laws after this big fight. She arrives separately from Kit, and she feels kind of like Kit has told them and they've taken his side, but they're still being very nice. They're keeping up appearances. Except Kit. Kit won't even look at her. He won't interact with her. And obviously his parents can tell that something's up. Whether or not he has told them, there's an air of tension. Then they serve this delicious meal, and when it gets to the table, she feels so sick, she runs to the bathroom and she pukes. When she comes back, she like flops down on the living room couch, and Kit is like rubbing her head and saying, it'll be okay. And this is concerning, obviously, as the reader, when you're reading that now that she's thrown up, now that she's sick, she's getting the attention that she was wanting from Kit and like care and love. Nothing happens with that. We don't go anywhere with that, but it feels like it's setting something up. Just a few days before her wedding, there's this going away party at her work for both her and a woman at her work who's pregnant. And she leaves this party to go out for lunch. It's just too much. And she breaks all of her rules, these kind of unwritten rules that she had in her head but had never like explicitly thought, because then it would all be real. So she goes to a fast food restaurant, which is against her rules, and it's very close to her workplace. So people might be there on their lunch breaks and see what she does when she goes in and she orders every single burger on the menu. I think there's 7 of them. But then her coworkers show up, coworkers who she told she was going out for lunch with her friends at a very nice restaurant, and they see her sitting alone at this table with 7 burgers in front of her, and she kind of tries to make up lies, but she can see that they know that she's alone here, and so she runs out of the restaurant. She doesn't pay, and like the waitress chases her down saying, you didn't pay, and she's like, oh my god, I can never go back to work again. After she runs out of this restaurant, she meets up with Kit. They had planned this walk to do on her last day of work before the wedding, long before she knew about this affair. So they're going on this walk, and while they're walking, Sasha calls Kit, and she says, Piglet is not answering Margot's texts or calls. I'm just calling to let you know that we will not be coming to the wedding. Margot is the maid of honor. Kit hands the phone off to Piglet, and Piglet talks to Margot, and Margot says, we can't watch you do this. You're not making the right choice, and I can't support you in it. So she is, of course, freaking out, but also, what did you expect? You've been ignoring your best friend in her time of need. She's literally just had a newborn baby, and you told her about the affair. It's this whole big thing, and it's, of course, incredibly upsetting for Piglet, and it's like the day or 2 days before her wedding, and she has to make her wedding cake, something that she has committed to. I am never ever going to try to pronounce any French words on the internet. That's something that I just promised myself many years ago, and I'm not going to start now. So she's making a cream puff tower. It's a notoriously difficult pastry to make, a notoriously difficult construction, and she is very confident in her cooking skills. She's told everyone that she knows, a lot of who are foodies, that she's going to make her own wedding cake, and this is what she's making. And the stakes do feel very high here, even though when you think about it logically when you're reading it, you're like, nobody but her really fucking cares about the wedding cake. Regardless, she has kind of done this thing where any misstep ruins the whole thing. She doesn't have quite enough sugar. She doesn't have enough pastry cream. She's filling them up too much, like that kind of thing. But it's all okay-ish. She assembles them, and then the biggest, most important one collapses right at the moment her mom comes in the door, and she screams at her to get out. There's pastry cream everywhere, like they've fallen to the floor and exploded, and she doesn't have enough to redo anything. And she's also out of time, but she can't move on. She's so stuck on making this wedding cake. And Franny, wonderful woman, is trying to help her, trying to fix things. Franny says, you need to go get in the shower. You're covered in pastry cream and caramel. Like, you got to get out of here. You're out of time. Hair and makeup will be here soon. I'll fix this. And Piglet's like, oh my God, like, you can't fix it. There's nothing we can do to fix it. And Franny's like, do you have a glue gun? So she glues it back together. And that's the end of part 1, which is kind of an arbitrary ending. Part 2 starts. It's the same morning. It's the same minute, really. And there are pages and pages and pages of her family trying to get her into her wedding dress that she does not fit in anymore. And this is very expected, but also pretty tense. They enlist the help of her dad, who becomes incredibly angry at her because he bought this wedding dress, and it's a 3,000 pound wedding dress, which pound is not, it's not a really heavy wedding dress. You're so stupid. And he is so angry at her selfishness that he storms out, and she's like, oh my God, who's gonna walk me down the aisle? Her mom's like, don't worry, I'll walk you down the aisle. It's all going to shit. He does end up meeting them at the church, and he does walk her down the aisle. She does it. She goes through with it. It's okay. But after this ceremony, she's like, nothing has changed. I still feel the exact same way. I'm still as angry and as upset and as hungry as I was before. She becomes silent and detached and so uncooperative with the photo taking. And really all she'll say is, I'm hungry. Can we get something to eat? Finally, she goes back into the kitchen where the caterers are, and she's like, I need you to feed me. And she just starts eating, not really caring what they think about this woman in her huge wedding gown, just eating the food that they're supposed to serve the guests. Finally, she's shuttered away to her wedding reception, if that's the right word, and while she's there, she is just gorging herself while everyone watches and judges, and she doesn't care. Her husband gives a speech, and she interrupts him, like, mouthful of food, and says, give me the mic. And she stands up in front of everyone, and she tells them all about his affair. I'm assuming affair. His betrayal. Whatever. And when she raises her glass for a toast, her wedding dress, which has been somehow squeezed onto her body, rips and like reveals her lingerie. She's not embarrassed by this. She's not embarrassed by anything at this point. She goes and smashes the wedding cakes, and she steals one, and then she takes it back and she runs to Margot's house. And Margot, the kind and lovely friend, supports her and lets her stay. The next day, she tells Kit, come to the house, and they meet up and they talk. They like hold hands, and it is confirmed that it really is over between the two of them. And the book ends with like 4 or 5 pages of her cooking this pasta meal from herself. And the last sentence is like, she ate until she was satisfied. Wow. It was like maybe the most boring ending of a book I've ever read. Just the absolutely most detailed instructions on how to cook this pasta. I don't care. I literally don't care. I know how to make pasta. I know to salt the water. Thank you so much, Lottie. Lottie? Hattie? Lottie, it's Lottie. In a way, this is my fault, because why do I keep reading books about food when I hate books about food? I don't think this book did it the worst, other than those last 5 pages, which truly, I felt like I was going to die. I literally could not make myself care about her making this fucking pasta dish. But it was okay. It wasn't like all these luxury foods that I have no idea how they taste or what they're like. It was more like high-end normal people foods, which is better. And there weren't all that many paragraphs about food, but every time there was, I was like, you just can't pull it off. You're not a good enough writer to pull it off. And at this point, I'm thinking, is anyone? Because I never liked this in a book. I liked the theme of this being about like desire and her not knowing what to do with her desire or how to manage it when she's left to make her own choices, when everything in her life is no longer about her husband's desires or his family's. Not knowing how to keep her desire from consuming her was a fun theme. I don't think that this was like the best written book I've ever read in my life. What I really felt about this was that it was quite predictable, and that it always felt like it was building up and building up and building up. And then even though it might have sounded kind of explosive, it wasn't that like big, huge ending that you were anticipating from such a tension building book. Like there was no shock factor ever. I wasn't like, oh my God, she really did that? No way. Because it was predictable, and because the style of writing just, I don't know, it was so detailed with the food and then not really detailed at all with what she was doing when she finally blew up, or with how other people were reacting when she finally blew up, which is maybe what I was missing here. What I liked a lot was how this book went from describing food as this delicacy, then to this grotesque thing, and then back to this delicacy. I like how that kind of like way of description followed along with how she was feeling. That was great. I think that the characters were complex, but the dynamics between them were really like simplistic, and I didn't really feel connected to anybody. Even though I liked Margot and I liked Franny, I did care kind of about what happened to Piglet because I really disliked her and I really enjoyed disliking her. I think she's horrible. I think she's horrible to the people around her. I think she's an awful person, and it was fun to read about that. This is another very plot-heavy book, very easy to pick up and very easy to get through. I think I read this in just a day, and it was never really a drag other than those last 5 pages, which honestly the worst ever, the worst in any book I've ever read. I just like didn't care. It's not like the writing was horrible, but not good enough to make that work. The next book I'm reading is kind of not exactly fitting with the theme, because this is more so a possession story, but it's a possession story told by a woman who thinks she's losing it and is like displaying this increasingly erratic behavior, and this book is so fun that I couldn't help myself but keep reading it. I didn't think I was going to include this, but I picked this up. I just couldn't stop reading it. Oh my god. Next time I update you, I'll read you the first chapter. It's just 2 pages. It was the best hook I've ever read. This is so fun. It's so like campy. I'll get into it later. I've been sitting here talking for a long time. Hello, it's like an hour or 2 later, and I just sat down and finished the rest of Come Closer by Sarah Gran, and I'm ready to talk to you about it. Does this fit the theme? Like, no. The first half kind of, but it is fully a story about a woman being possessed by a demon, not really about her going insane because it's the demon doing it, but like at the same time it is about her going insane, and it was fun. So I'm including it. I don't even care what you say. So despite the language that's used, I'm going to bleep out. I'm going to read the first 2 pages, which is the first chapter, to you because it's crazy. It's one of my favorite hook chapters that I've ever read in a book ever. It's so good. Okay, are you ready? In January, I had a proposal due to my boss, Leon Fields, on a new project. We were renovating a clothing store in a strip mall outside the city. Nothing tremendous. I finished the proposal on a Friday morning and dropped it on his desk with a cheerful little note. Let me know what you think, while he was in a meeting with a new client in the conference room. Later that morning, Leon threw open his office door with a bang. Amanda, he called. Come in here. I rushed to his office. He picked up a handful of papers off his desk and stared at me, his flabby face white with anger. What the hell is this? I don't know. It looked like my proposal, same heading, same format. My hands shook. I couldn't imagine what was wrong. Leon handed me the papers, and I read the first line. Leon Fields is a sucking. What is this? I asked Leon. He stared at me. You tell me. You just dropped it on my desk. My head spun. What are you talking about? I put the proposal on your desk, not this. The proposal for the new job. I sifted through the papers on his desk for the proposal I had dropped off. What is this? A joke? Amanda, he said, 3 people say they saw you go to the printer, print this out, and bring it to my desk. I felt like I had stepped into a bad dream. There was no logic, no reason anymore. Wait, I said to Leon. I ran back to my desk, printed out the proposal, checked it, and brought it back to Leon's office. He had calmed down a little and was sitting in his big leather chair. I handed it to him. This is it. This is exactly what I put on your desk this morning. He looked over the papers and then looked back up at me. Then where did that come from? He looked back at the fake proposal on the desk. How would I know? I said. Let me see it again. I read the second line. Leon Fields eats shit and likes it. Disgusting, I said. I don't know. Someone's playing a trick on you, I guess. Someone thinks it's funny. Or playing a trick on you, he said. Someone replaced your proposal with this. I'm sorry. I thought... He looked around the office, embarrassed. In the 3 years I had worked for him, I had never heard Leon Fields apologize to anyone ever. It's okay, I told him. What were you supposed to think? We looked at each other. I'll look over the proposal, he said. I'll get back to you soon. I left his office and went back to my own desk. I hadn't written the fake proposal, but I wished I knew who did. Because it was true. Leon Fields was a sucking and he did eat shit. And I had always expected that he liked it very much. That rules. That got me so incredibly hooked immediately. And this book is really short and it's very fast throughout. It doesn't waste time. It doesn't have time to waste. 145 pages and so much happens. This book is almost entirely plot, and I'm going to tell you what happens in the plot. So in the first half of the book, things are happening to Amanda, but she's not really seeing the patterns, and this is my favorite part of the book. It starts with this tapping sound that she's hearing in the apartment that she shares with her husband, and they only really hear it when she's around. He leaves, she hears it the entire time. She leaves, he doesn't hear it at all. Her husband, Ed, is like a good guy. He's kind of her savior in a way. He brought this stability and order to her very unstable and messy life. That's not a perfect relationship. They fight. He can be very rigid. He can be very picky. He stays home very late sometimes and doesn't tell her, and they fight more and more as this possession is taking hold of Amanda. There's this one fight near the beginning that they're having, and it's interspersed with this tap, tap, tap that she's hearing in the apartment. And then at the climax of the fight, the tapping stops. She has this dream of a beautiful woman with long pointy teeth named Nama. And after she has this dream, she's thinking about this woman a lot because she recognizes her. And it takes her a while, but she realizes that this is her imaginary friend. When she was a kid, she had created this imaginary friend to replace like a mother figure, because her mom had died when she was like 3 to a heart attack, and then her stepmother was not a very kind woman, a woman who didn't want to be a mother really. And so she created this imaginary friend who she knew was fake, but then one day she saw an actual real human woman on the street who was the imaginary friend that she had created and addressed her by name. And then like a car honks and she turns around, and when she turns back, this woman is gone. And that's the woman that she's dreamed of. She tells Ed about this, about dreaming about this woman and about what happened when she was a kid. And he's skeptical. He doesn't really believe that she had actually seen her real imaginary friend, because who would believe that? We go to this scene where they go to the pharmacy together, and Amanda's looking at a lipstick and she puts it back. But then when they try to leave, the alarms are going off, and they dig into her purse and they find this lipstick. And she's like, I didn't put it in there. And the security guards don't believe her, and they won't let it go until Ed says, it's fine, we'll pay for the lipstick. And Amanda's like, it wasn't my color. Like, usually I like a pinkish nude, but this dark red lipstick was the only thing I wore through that summer and fall. And then when I ran out of it, I went back to the pharmacy and stole another one. She's taken up smoking again ever since this weird kind of behavioral changes started happening, and she's smoking on the couch sitting beside Ed, and she goes to like put her cigarette out in the ashtray, and she just darts over and burns him on the leg with it. And they're both like, oh my god, that was so weird. Like, I didn't mean to do it, of course. It must have been like a muscle flinch or something. He forgives her and it's okay, but it's a very unsettling moment for her because she had the intention of putting it out in the ashtray, and that's not where her hand went. Then there's this stuff with this stray dog that she's befriended. This dog walks home with her every night, and all of a sudden he doesn't recognize her at all, and he actually bites her and she has to go get rabies shots. One day she gets back to her desk after a lunch break, and her coworker, who's kind of like a little tattletale, like creeping on everyone in the office, trying to make sure everyone's doing their job perfectly. He's like, where the fuck were you? It's been 2 hours. And she's like, it's 1. What do you mean? And she has lost an entire hour of time. During this lunch break, she had gone to a newsstand, and while she was there, the guy at the newsstand was very rude to her. He was like, you can't browse, either buy or get out. And she was just pissed at him, and they bickered a little bit, and then as she was leaving, he called her a fucking bitch. And then she has this moment where she kind of like loses consciousness, but just for a second. But when she's back up, she doesn't have her cigarette that she had in her hand, but she goes back to the office and she checks the time, and it's 5:02, but she only checks the minute hand. She's lost an hour in this time. She decides in this moment while she's talking to her coworker, she must have fainted, and somehow nobody noticed, and then she got back up and she didn't even notice. But then a couple weeks later, she sees on the news that this guy at the newsstand had been murdered at his newsstand in what they call an attempted robbery. And at the time, it doesn't really faze her, but she realizes later on that this was her. She had almost certainly killed him. She starts getting these flashes of intuition, seeing into people's lives when they touch her, and for some reason that doesn't really like indicate anything to her. She's like, oh, it's just this weird little thing that happens. Just a little bit of intuition where it's like she's fully having visions. Her and her husband, who are fighting more and more and more, they end up going on vacation to their friend's beach house, and she goes out for a swim while her husband's taking a nap. And while she's out there, there's this little girl swimming alone, and she kind of gets tossed around in the waves a little bit, and she's obviously like struggling to swim. And so Amanda goes up to her, intending to help her, but she grabs her hair and pulls her under, and then up and then down. So she's just like in this constant state of near drowning, but not quite dead. Finally, she manages to let out a scream, and then Amanda pretends that she was just helping her. And around here is where she's starting to believe that she is possessed, until Ed brings up the idea that maybe it's just mental illness and she needs to see a psychiatrist. She loves this. She's like, that's so much better than being possessed. I would love if this was mental illness. So she goes to see a psychiatrist and she tells him kind of a sanitized version of what's going on. She doesn't want to admit to the little girl, of course, or to burning Ed with a cigarette. And the psychiatrist is kind of like, there's nothing wrong with you. You don't have a mental illness. You're not sick. She's frustrated by this and she ends up blurting out that she burnt her husband with a cigarette. And he says, it was just an accident. It was a slip of your hand. Don't worry about it. And she's like, but I never told you about this. How do you know that? And he says, it's all in your file that your doctor sent over. She's like, I didn't tell my doctor about it either. She reaches for the file and he like very sternly grabs her wrist and says no. And he doesn't let go until she's backed up. And she leaves. She never sees him again. Instead, she goes to get a kind of exorcism. She's bought a few books on demon possession now. And she's looking to get rid of this demon who she fully believes she's possessed by. But this exorcism, or what they call depossession, doesn't work. It just solidifies the connection between her and Nama. And here, Nama basically completely takes over. Her relationship with Ed has totally dissolved. They don't talk to each other at all. Ed ends up leaving her for another woman. Nama is very much driven by a desire for men. So Amanda is always waking up in the aftermath of having sex with these random men that Nama has wanted. And Ed actually fully leaves her. They're not living this like disconnected life in the loft together when he comes in and finds her with a man in their bed. Because Amanda's not really there, she can't tell the story anymore. We just get these little vignettes where she has woken up and been in a situation that Nama has put her in. At one point, she wakes up and she's in the kitchen and she hears a knocking and she thinks it's the front door, but it's actually from inside the bathroom where a table has been pushed up against the door and a woman is saying, please let me out. I'm hurt. I need help. Then it cuts to her running into a woman on the street and the woman is rude and snotty and like, excuse me, even though it's her fault. And Amanda just blacks out. And when she wakes up, the woman is on the ground sobbing with her wrist snapped in two. Amanda has completely lost control. She can't say anything about this to anyone. It's long past the point where she could have told Ed what she thinks is going on because every time she tries to speak, Nama has full control over what she says. The book ends with Ed coming back to the house saying, it's been a year since I left you, which is crazy to the reader. You have no idea how long this time frame has been. He says, it's been a year. I'm ready to marry again, and I would like to divorce you. And then Amanda wakes up, and there's people all over her apartment. They're snapping pictures. They're moving things around. She's like, where's Ed? She looks down, she's covered in blood, and she strips off her clothes, and there's no wound. She's like, where's Ed? Where's Ed? She goes into the bedroom, and it's just filled with blood. And on the wall is written in blood, I win. So that's the book. There's a lot packed into here, as you can tell. I think that a problem with this book, it was good when there was like, oh my god, a year has passed between Ed leaving and now, but there was a problem with the timeline being a little bit wishy-washy. I wasn't 100% sure what was happening and when it was happening because she was like telling this story from the present. So for example, with the lipstick, she said, I wore that lipstick throughout the summer and the fall, and then in November I went and stole another one. And then the very next chapter starts and it says the next day. And it's like, where are we? It's a bit confusing. I thought this book was so quick and so fun. It felt like it drew me right in. I mean, that first chapter is crazy. I really did like the first half a lot more than the second half. I mean, I don't care all that much about just like a horror story. It's from 2003, so I feel like it was at a time where typically horror was like really just horror. I'm not saying this is like a huge overgeneralization, but I find that the horror that I read that's newer, like nowadays, has a little bit more to it. Like it's saying something, and this was kind of just horror. It was fun though, and it was entertaining, and that's all it needed to be. I just think, in my opinion, I probably would have liked it a bit more if it had something to say. Also, being from 2003, I don't think can really excuse that there is some pretty uncool race stuff happening in here. This is written by, as far as I know, a white author. She describes people as having nutmeg skin, which is just like a little bit of like, ooh. That's a bit weird. Like, she's not describing white people like that. And also there's a point where she says, like, my hair was so knotted it was almost dreadlocks. And it's like, wow, that's really, like, let's dig into that. What are you fucking saying? What? Literally, just tell me exactly what you're saying there. But on the whole, this was fun. I mean, it was almost entirely plot. It's so quick. Like, I don't think I've ever read a book as fast as I read this, just because you're just pushed right through it. Bret Easton Ellis blurbs this, and he says it's written with an unerring confidence. And obviously I couldn't say anything better than Bret Easton Ellis could, but that's exactly, like the perfect way to describe this. Because it's so plot heavy, there really is no characterization whatsoever, and I wonder if there could be, particularly with Amanda, because we don't really know who Amanda is or whose voice is speaking because she is being possessed. So I think that that would have been really difficult for Sarah Gran to manage, but at the same time, like, I didn't feel connected really to anyone in this story. It was fun. It was just a fun story. Oh my god, that first chapter. Though I wouldn't say it's perfect, I really did enjoy my time with this book, and if you're into horror, I would highly recommend it. It's so entertaining. Okay, now I'm gonna film the intro. Okay, that's the end of the video. I had a lot of fun reading these books. If you have any recommendations for me for books about people losing their minds, unraveling, particularly like losing their grip on reality, like the mustache, I would love to hear them. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.